Okay, hi guys. So today we're going to move on to lesson 4.4 in our yellow book. So turn to lesson 4.4. The lesson is called Matching Equations to Graphs. So basically up to this point you've learned how to take an equation, make a table of values, and then graph it and turn it into a graph of a line. So what you're going to do now is your goal is to, if you're given an equation and you're given a graph, how do you tell if it matches or if that equation is that graph? So two strategies you're going to learn, and then you're going to practice both strategies. So the first strategy you're going to use, or you're going to learn, is the strategy of using a table of values to help you. So that's going to be strategy number one. So table of values. So when you're asked to do one of these questions, you can pick strategy one or you can pick strategy two. So strategy one is that you're going to make a table of values. So here I have two equations. One is y equals x. One is y equals negative x. So they're asking basically of these two equations, which one is graph A and which one is graph B. So you can see there's two lines on this coordinate grid over here, and we don't know which one is which. So with the strategy table of values, what you do is you make a table of values for each of the lines or equations of the lines, and then you can pick 3 points is good, and you can find the y value for that point. So when you decide what x values to choose, you want to look at your coordinate grid that they give you and make sure you pick x values that are in the picture. Like here I can see x values go from -4 on this side all the way to +4 for x. So x goes from -4 to +4. So I wouldn't want to pick anything outside of that. So I'm maybe going to pick, let's say, -2. I'm going to pick 0, and then I'm going to pick +2. So all of those points I should be able to see in my picture here, or in my diagram. So just like we practiced before, how do you find out what the y value would be? Well, you take the x value and sub it in where the x is in the equation, and then you solve for y. So for this one, I have y equals x. So where the x spot is, I'm going to sub in the x value. So the first one is a -2. The first one is a -2 that I'm subbing in. So in the x spot, I put a -2. And because this equation is pretty simple, y does equal x, so whatever x is, y will be. My y value is -2. For the second one, I'm going to sub in a 0 for x, so I get y equals 0. And for my third one, I sub in 2 for x, so I get y equals 2. So this basically is a graph where all the x values are equal to exactly what all the y values are. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to graph those points on my grid. So the first point was -2, -2. So that point is here. Whoops. My second point is 0, 0. So that point is on both graphs. And then my third point is 2, 2. So after I plot my points, I'm just using a little marker pen for the iPad, so it's kind of hard to plot, but once I plot my 3 points, it's pretty obvious that, one of the points is on both the lines for A and B, but the other 2 points are both on B only. So this equation, y equals x, is going to be a match for graph B. Okay, and then so the remaining one is going to be a match for graph A, but we're still going to test it. So for each time you want to do a table of values, this is kind of you showing your work. So even though you know it should match, you want to show your work. So I'm going to sub in the same, I'm going to pick the same x values. So now my equation for this one is y equals -x. So when I sub in my x value in the x spot, don't forget you have that extra negative in front here. So my first value I'm going to sub in is -2. So y equals negative negative 2. A double negative makes a positive. So my y point is going to be 2 here. Okay, for my next one, when I sub in a 0, so y equals negative 0. Well, negative 0 is just 0. So my second point is 0, 0. And then for the last one, y equals negative, and I'm subbing in a 2 for x, so that would just be negative 2. I'm just going to plot these 3 points. I'm just going to pick a different color. So for this one, I'm going to graph it in red. So my 3 points are negative 2, positive 2, so that one's up here. Then I have 0, 0. And then I have 2, positive 2 to the right, negative 2 down. So all 3 of these points are on graph A. So then this equation would match to graph A. Okay, so for this strategy, so this is strategy number 1, which is graphing using a table of values. You just make a table of values for each equation. You plot those points, and then you see where do those points match up. Do they match on graph A, or do they match on graph B? Okay, so you can pause the video now and use that strategy to try and do the check below, and then play the video to see what the answer would be. Okay, so now that you've tried the check, I'm going to do it for you so you can check your work. So for this one, we're trying to figure out, there's 2 equations, y equals x plus 2. So this is the first one. The second one is y equals x minus 2. So the question is, which one matches to this line here? So you can see the line drawn. So the strategy is number 1, the strategy that we're using is table of values. So for table of values, you pick 3 points. So here they've chosen 0, 1, and 2 for x. So wherever the x is, they're substituting in. So for the first one, they're subbing in a 0. 0 plus 2 is 2. So the first point would be 0, 2. I'm going to plot that. So don't move to the left or right, just move up 2. Okay, the second one I'm subbing in, and you want to try and keep going because like mistakes happen. So that's why we always test 3 points, just in case, because 2 lines can share 1 point in common. So in the table, 1 point could be on both tables. You could do a mistake, so that's why we always do 3 just to make sure. So 1 could be common, 1 could be a mistake, so we do a third one, and then when we know all 3 line up, then we for sure have the right answer. So for the next one, we're subbing in x equals 1. So 1 plus 2 is 3. So we get the point 1, 3. So to the right 1 and then up 3. So that point's way up here. And then for the last one, we're subbing in a 2. 2 plus 2 is 4. So to the right 2, up 4. So that's way up the grid over here. So this is the line that these points are making. So we can kind of see clearly that that's not lining up. So let's try the next table. So we're subbing in a 0. 0 take away 2 would be negative 2. So the first point is 0, so you don't move to the left or the right, you just move down 2. So that's where the first point is. The second point, we're subbing in a 1 in the x spot, so we have x minus 2. So 1 take away 2 would leave us with negative 1. So to the right 1, down 1. So it looks like both points line up so far, so we test the final one. X is 2, so 2 minus 2 would be 0. So to the right 2, not up or down. So all 3 points line up. So basically we know that's going to be a match. So in the explanation here it says the 3 points on the first graph do not lie on the line. So the first 3 points were 0, 2, that's that one. The next one was 1, 3, and then the last one was 2, 4. So they did not lie on the graph. For the second table, we had 0, negative 2, 1, negative 1, and 2, 0, and they did lie on the graph. So the equation had to be the second one. That was our match. Okay, so that was strategy 1, using a table of values. So now we're going to move on to strategy 2. For strategy 2, this one is helpful when you maybe only have one equation and you have multiple graphs. So strategy 2 is called substitution. Okay, for strategy 2, what you do is you're going to substitute points from the graph into the equation and check if they make a true or false statement. So if multiple points from a graph are substituted into equation and they make a true statement each time, then you've found a match. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a couple of points off each graph and then I'm going to substitute those points in. So for graph A here, I'm going to pick this point. So that point, I've moved 1 to the left and I haven't moved up or down. So that point is -1, 0. And then the second point, I'll choose, let's say this one here. I haven't moved up to the left or the right, but I've moved 1 up. So that point is 0, 1. Okay, so that's for graph A. So how it works is you take your equation, so y equals x minus 1, and remember a point has two parts to it. So this is the x coordinate and this is the y coordinate. So what I'm going to do is in the equation where the x coordinate is, I'm going to sub in the x value. Where the y coordinate is, I'm going to sub in the y value. And then I'm going to check if the statement that's left is true or false after I simplify. So in the y spot, I'm going to put a 0. So here I'm replacing the y by a 0. Then I have an equals. Then I have the x spot. So in the x spot, I'm putting in -1. And then I still have this -1 at the end. So what you're going to do now is simplify the left and right side till you get one number. So on the left side, it's already simplified, so I have a 0. On the right side, I have -1 minus 1, so that gives me -2. So then you look, is the statement true or false? So 0 equals -2. So that's false, and I just exit, meaning that it doesn't work. So we always do 2 points, just in case we made a mistake on the first point or on one of the points. So they both have to not work for this not to be a match. So let's check the next point. So remember, we write out the equation. Okay, we can label the point to remember that the first number is the x coordinate, the second is the y. So this time I'm putting a 1 in the y spot, and then in the x spot I'm putting a 0. So a 0, and then I've got a -1. So on the left side it's already simplified. On the right side I have 0 minus 1. So 0 take away 1 is a -1. So this side doesn't work either, or this point doesn't work either. So if both points don't work, then we don't have a match. So graph A is not going to be a match to this equation. So we can't just say it's graph B, we have to test. So once again, pick 2 points. So this time, let's say I'll pick this point. So this point, I don't move to the left or the right. So the x coordinate is 0, and then I move 1 down. The y coordinate is -1. So remember, you have to test 2. So the next point I'll pick is this one. So that one I move to the left 1, or to the right 1, sorry, but I don't move up or down, so that's a 0. Okay, so once again, now I'm substituting in to check these 2 points out. So in the y spot, I'm putting -1. In the x spot, I'm putting 0. So simplify on the left side and the right side. So left side's already simplified. Right side, 0 take away 1 is -1. So this is what a true statement would look like. The same number on the left side as the right side. So I've got a match. Remember, we got to test 2 points. So let's do the second one just to make sure, because it could be that neither work. So we want to test just to make sure. So this time my y is a 0, my x is a 1. So I put a 0 on this side, and then I have 1 take away 1. So 1 take away 1 is 0. So my left side matches my right side. So I've got a match. So because these 2 points worked, which graph on this equation matches. So the answer would be graph B. X minus 1 is the equation. If you were graphing that, it would look like graph B. Okay? So those are the two strategies. Strategy 1 is making tables. Strategy 2 is picking points and substituting them in. So you can pause the video and try it below. If you get thrown off by the blanks, sometimes people are confused by the blanks for the substitution. You can always just do this work, not by fill in the blanks. You can just do it on this side. Okay, you'll probably see what I mean when you start doing it. Okay, so pause the video and try, and then you can play the video to get the answers. Okay, so it says show that this graph has the equation y equals 2x plus 1. So this time they just want us to match and see, does this actually match up? So they want us to use 2 points. The first point they want us to use is point A, and the second point is point B. So basically what we're doing is taking y equals 2x plus 1. In the x spot we're putting a 0, in the y spot we're putting a 1. So I get 1 equals 2 times 0, right? When we're substituting in up against another number, we have to use brackets to show multiplying, plus 1. So 2 times 0 plus 1. So 1 equals 2 times 0 is 0. So remember, you're following order of operations to clean up this side. So you'd multiply the 2 times 0 first, and then you're going to add the 1 last. So we get a 1 equals 1. So that point works. You can put a check. And now let's test the second point. So the second point they want us to do is called point B. It's 1, 3. So I always label my point with XY just so I don't forget. So in the Y spot, I'm going to be placing a 1. Or sorry, I'm placing a 3. Let me just erase that. Okay, so my equation is y equals 2x plus 1. So in my y spot, I'm putting a 3. In my x spot, I'm putting a 1. So 3 equals, so 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 more gives me 3 on that side. So we're not moving, this is not algebra, we're moving one thing to the other side or anything like that. We just stick with each side, do order of operations and simplify each side, and at the bottom you're trying to hope for a match. So here we've shown both the points work, so this is a match. Okay, so now is the practice. You can pause the video, work through the practice, and then once you've tried them all, then you can unpause the video and check your answers. Okay, so for the first one, we're checking, or we're solving by strategy 1, which is table of values. So they've made a table of values here for you. So -2, -1, and 0 they're subbing in. So when we sub in -2 for x, we get -2 plus 2, which is 0. For the second point, we're subbing in a -1 in the x spot. So -1 plus 2 is a positive 1. So for this one, my point is -2 for x, 0 for y. For this one, I have a -1 for x, 1 for y. And then in the last one, substituting a 0 in, I get a 0 for x and a 2 for y. So let's plot these 3 points. -2, 0 is here. -1, positive 1 is here. And 0, 2 is here. So all 3 points from my table of values end up being on the graph. So we've got a match. Next question. Once again, practicing table of values. So we're substituting in the x values that they give us. The first point we get is -1, 3. So -1, -3, so that's down here. Second point that we get is 0, 0. So that lies on both graphs. The third point we get is 1, 3. So all 3 of those points So that was -1, -3, 0, 0, and 1, +3. They all ended up matching to graph B. So then graph B matches that equation. For the second one, don't forget if you're multiplying a negative by a negative, so -3 times -1, that would be +3. Negative times negative is positive. Anything times 0 is 0. And then negative times positive is negative. So here I get, for this one, I'm just going to change my color. First point is -1, +3. Second point is 0, 0. Third point is 1, -3. So all three of those points ended up being on graph A. So 0, 0 is on both, so that's why we always do more than one point, just so that we can make sure. So all these graphs, or lines, ended up being on graph A, so graph A would be the match. Okay, now we're doing some matching here as well with table of values. So keep practicing table of values here. We're subbing in -1, 0, and +1. So remember, one take away -1, a double negative always makes a positive. So that's a +2. One take away nothing is 1, and one take away 1 is 0. So we're trying to figure out where is the match going to happen. So -1, +2 is here. 0, +1 is here. And 1, 0 is here. So 1, 0 is also matched on here. But because the other two don't work, then it's definitely not going to match with that one. So for this one, in the negative spot there, so in the x spot, I'm putting a -1. So -1 minus 1 would be a -2. 0 minus 1 would be a -1. And 1 minus 1 would be a 0. So plotting those 3 points, -1, -2 is down over here. 0, -1 is here. And then this is that overlap point that ends up being on both. But because all 3 points there are on graph B, that one would match to graph B. So y equals 1 minus x has the first 3 points. So it's going to match to graph A. And then the second one had these 3 points. So it's going to match to graph B. Okay, and then the last question, wanting you to test. So it said, which of these two graphs, is it graph A or graph B, matches to this equation? So this is strategy number 2 when you're doing substitution. So I'm going to test for graph A, 2 points. And you might have tested different points than me, so that's not a big deal. I'm going to test the points that they highlight, because that's maybe a better chance, or those are the ones that you tested. So for graph A, they highlighted 0, 3, and they highlighted -3, 0. For graph B, they highlighted 3, 0, and 0, -3. Okay, so remember with the strategy number 2 for substitution, you're taking the equation, and wherever the x and y are, that's where you're putting in these numbers. So x is 0, and y is +3. So on the left side, I end up with 3. On the right side, I have 0 take away 3, which is -3. So that one doesn't match, which doesn't mean we don't rule out that one yet. So we have to get 2 that don't match, because we could have just made a mistake. So let's test the -3 and the 0. So in the y spot, I'm putting 0. In the x spot, I'm putting -3. So I have 0 equals, so -3 minus 3 would be -6. So that one doesn't work either. So it doesn't look like graph A is going to be the match. So let's test to confirm that graph B is. So this time in the y spot, I'm putting a 0. In the x spot, I'm putting a +3. So 0 equals 3 minus 3. So 3 take away 3 is 0. So it looks like we have a match. So we just have to do 2, right, for it to be confirmed that it works. So for the second one, in the x spot I'm putting a 0, and in the y spot I'm substituting in a -3. I get a -3 on the left side. On the right side I have 0 take away 3, which is -3. So I get a match. So the question is, which graph has equation y equals y equals x minus 3? So the answer would be graph B. Okay? All right. Good work.